plant brain and plastic culturist as well as not. And by now you can tell I have an accent. And some of you may be thinking about where my accent is from, the place where I'm from. I'm here to tell you that I have a southern accent. Right. I have a southern accent. Because I'm from the big continent of South America down here. Can't get this thing to work, sure. But Alabama is up there, South America is down there, and I'm from the south. And since I'm south of south, that means I have a southern accent. This is Alabama right here. Alabama right there. This is the continent of South America. I'm from this little country. This little country here was formerly known as British Guyana, and it is the only English-speaking country in the continent of South America. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, although my English is accented, English is my native language. I speak other languages, but English is my mother tongue. So I understand English very well. Sometimes I have to remind my classes at Tuskegee about that, see? Because once they think you have an accent, well, we don't get an easy A in this class. Having said that, for those of you who have heard my presentations before, you pretty much know how I go through my presentations. I usually like to dwell on the Tuskegee story and saying that this is the last day in February of Black History Month. I would like to share with you that Tuskegee story. I don't know how many of you are aware of how Tuskegee came about. But Tuskegee came about in 1881 through the actions of this gentleman, Mr. Lewis Adams. Mr. Lewis Adams was a tinsmith, blacksmith in Tuskegee. And after the abolition of slavery, he and his wife ended up training quite a lot of the former slaves. And it got to a stage that it became overwhelming. He and his wife couldn't do it anymore. And he wanted to open a school. And he was looking for an opportunity. And an opportunity came right up knocking at his door. And that opportunity came in the form of Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson was running for the state legislature. He was white. He had competition who was also white. But at that time, there were many blacks in Tuskegee who voted. And Lewis Adams was what I call the gatekeeper. He was an influential leader in the black community. So Mr. Thompson came to him with a proposition. Well, I need the black support to get in. And for the black support, what do I have to do to get the black support? And unlike many of our modern politicians who will try to line their pockets, Lewis Adams simply asked Representative Thompson that when he gets elected in the Alabama legislature to pass a bill to appropriate $2,000 a year to pay a teacher for a school. He told him, don't worry about the building, I'll deal with the building. All I need is some funds to pay the teacher. And Mr. Thompson got elected, and he kept his end of the deal, and in 1881 a bill was passed in the Alabama House of Legislature, allocating $2,000 to pay a teacher. Lewis Adams then promptly sent a telegram to Hampton Institute. And remember now, back in those days, and I think many of you in this room still remember what a telegram is, right? In today's email and social networking, I find a lot of folks don't know what a telegram is. But he sent a telegram to Hampton Institute asking for a teacher, if they would send a teacher down to Tuskegee. And that teacher turned out to be Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington happened to graduate from Hampton and was visiting Hampton that summer, early spring in 1881. And General Armstrong, who was the principal of Hampton, asked him if he would be interested in coming to Tuskegee and establish a school. And he agreed. And in 1881, on the 4th of July, he opened Tuskegee University in an old building that was Adams. But I'd like to share with you two highlights of Booker T's character. He got into Hampton in doing one of the most, what we would consider today, one of the most menial tasks. Okay? When he went to Hampton, he didn't have any money to pay the fees. And the admission officer had put him in a room about this size and asked him to clean the room. And he cleaned the room. And he cleaned it from top to bottom, to the sides, everywhere. Admission officer came back in with a pair of white gloves and did a white glove inspection. And he passed. The reason why I mention this is because as a young man, when he lived in Malden, Virginia, he worked for a lady by the name of Virginia Ruffner, who was a New England Puritan, and she was the one who taught him how to clean her house. He resented it at the time, but he later wrote in his autobiography that when he got to Hampton, he found it to be most beneficial. So by learning to clean and to be humble, he got into Hampton. When he got to Tuskegee, and he founded Tuskegee, he needed to put up buildings. And he figured out that the easy way to put up these buildings, I can get the students to make the bricks and construct the buildings. There was one problem to that big grand idea. He didn't know how to make bricks, and nobody on the staff or faculty knew how to make bricks. But at the end of the campus was a gentleman whose name is Mr. Varnum, who was a retired brickmaker. And he had all the molds and everything that Booker T. Washington needed to make these bricks. So he went over one day to Mr. Varnum's house and asked to see him. Mrs. Varnum told him that her husband was not home, and she called him by a name which I wouldn't mention, and asked him to come in the house and help her sort of move some furniture about the house. He tied his horse up, he went into the house, and he moved and rearranged the furniture. And he left. When Mr. Varnum came home that afternoon, Mrs. Varnum told him that somebody was here asking for you. And she didn't get Booker T's name. So he asked her to describe this person. So his wife described Booker T. And the next morning, he went to Booker T's office to see him and to find out what it was he wanted to see him about. So they got down to talking about making bricks, and he wanted to rent the molds from Mr. Varnum, and they got into a nice discussion, lively discussion. And the end of one hour, what happened? Mr. Varnum not only donated the molds to make bricks, but he agreed to work for the university and teach the students there how to make the bricks. And I feel that these two occasions that faced Booker T and how he handled it is one of the things that made the university what it is today. Okay? And last but not least, whom we consider the patron saint for Tuskegee, George Washington Carver, and since we're in the Wiregrass area, he is also well known for peanuts. But I'm not here to talk today about what his contributions to the peanut industry was. He made another significant contribution to the economy of the whole Southeast that very few of us recognize today. And that contribution, ladies and gentlemen, is paper. Paper that we write on. I'm not saying that he invented paper. What he did, in 1910, he developed a chemical process to extract the turpentine from the southern pine trees. And thereby, he started a whole industry where in the South we manufacture. We're one of the leading centers in this country in paper manufacture. And how he came to do that was very simple. At 1900, this country was industrializing at a scale that outstripped the supply of paper. At that time, they made paper from the northern spruce. And needless to tell you, in an industrialized society, you use a lot of paper. So the trees were not growing as fast as they should. But in the South, we had all these pine trees around us. But they could not use the pine trees because of the high turpentine content of the pine trees. And in 1910, he came up with a formula. He came up with a formula that extracted the turpentine and allowed the wood to be chemically processed to turn into paper. Did he get a patent on this? No, ladies and gentlemen, he did not get a patent. What he did, he just handed the formulation over to private consortium of companies. And today, as you drive through the whole Southeast and you see those paper factories, it started with an invention of a former slave who worked at Tuskegee.